So, hi everyone. My name is Daniel. I've come to a couple of these, and this talk is just following up on a whole bunch of previous conversations and talks from previous conferences. You know, the where are they now of my conference presentations. So we're going to be talking about a couple of things that are the common thread as they were discussed at previous conferences. Some random conversations, or the hallway track as it's affectionately known. And then going in chronological order, follow-ups from Portland, orchestration with Puppet, Vienna, where I talked about considerations when targeting long-term support releases, and then handling database updates from Sandusky. So if we start out at one of the conferences, I don't remember which, I was talking to a couple of people, including Megan, about integrating Jira and MediaWiki. So WikiTech has an extension that is now public called Summary to Jira Comment, where if you mention a task in your edit summary or multiple tasks, it will then use the Jira API to add comments to that task saying, hey, look, it was mentioned. The only thing that is leaked, or the only part of your wiki that is reflected in the comment is a link to the diff, the editor name, and the page title. A previous version of the extension also included the edit summary, but sometimes we might put secrets in that. If you don't fill out an edit summary and it says, you know, created the page with whatever content, we didn't want to risk leaking that. So here is a screenshot from our own WikiTech Jira installation. You can see that I made an edit to our page about Jira. And here's what that comment looks like. So yeah, just a small extension to, you know, take an edit on the wiki and be like, oh, that was about this task. We know that in the edit summary, you can go from the wiki to the task, but to go from the task to find all the edits, you couldn't do as easily, and now you can, because they'll be reflected in the issue history on the task. Entirely unrelated, extension management. There was a conversation at one of the conferences, I think I was talking about it with Rich, about having a front-end tool to manage updates to your extension version. You know, the web updater that MediaWiki comes with, I don't think I've ever actually used it, but in theory, it lets you update which version of MediaWiki is installed. And that would presumably update the bundled skins and extensions, you know, Visual Editor, Vector, Monobook. But what about all your other extensions? Well, now we have wiki extensions. WikiTech developed this, and it's now public. It adds a special page where you can check the extension status and see if there are updates. And if there are updates, you can apply them. By check status, I mean sometimes people make live changes to edit some stuff. And it'll warn you, hey, there's a live change, so don't actually update. You won't be able to use the front end to update if there are live changes. It's limited to the extensions that are installed from Git. So if you install Semantic MediaWiki with Composer, you can't use this tool to update it. But when you install flagged revs or approved revs or some other revs extension, I don't know, any of the other extensions that aren't installed with Composer, you can update, including Wiki Extensions itself. And it'll say if someone has made an edit to one of the files on the server, no, you can't do that. So here's what the interface looks like. You know, Vector is bundled, and so it's not actually finding a remote version to fetch from, because you wouldn't be updating it manually. You'd update that as part of your MediaWiki update. On the other hand, Wiki Extensions is looking at the Git information. It's saying, yeah, we have a remote, and we can compare it, and it's up to date. And Minimal Example, which is an extension that WikiTech uses to showcase the process of extension development. It's just a minimal example of doing different things. You can see it was installed, the main version from the main branch, as of this commit. But hey, there are updates available. And if you clicked Update here, it would indeed fetch those and update your Git version. Moving on, entirely separate. Orchestration with Puppet, showing how far AI has come. I tried to get an AI generator to make an image like this 2 years ago, where I wanted a whole bunch of stuffed puppets playing instruments. It wasn't able to do it as well. But that's not what the follow-up is. The follow-up is that Wikitech, which was using Puppet to help orchestrate our code and set up infrastructure as code for tracking, we still use this. We found that it has helped with our deployment process. It's helped centralize and track changes. I think it's great, but I might be biased. I'm the one that pushed for it. There was a question, I think from Rich, when I was talking about this, comparing it with Ansible and the question of having an agent on the server versus an agentless process like Ansible. There is a benefit to Ansible that I have since discovered that Puppet doesn't have, which is if you want to have a secret that is not available to everyone with sudo access on the server, you shouldn't put it in Puppet, because Puppet has an API that will contact the controlling server and ask for the catalog, and it will include somewhere in that the secret. If you use Ansible, that secret is locally on your machine, and it doesn't necessarily get exposed to the target server. It's only present when you're running the Ansible commands, is my understanding. So that is a consideration that I had not thought of when we were deciding what to do. But at this point, I think we're using Puppet, and we like it enough that I think we're going to stay on it. That's not to say that it hasn't been without challenges. When we wanted to use some external Puppet modules, we used the Puppet management tool R10K. I'm sure this is like IATN, in which the 10 is supposed to be short for some 10 letters. I don't know what those letters are, though. So R10K and Gem for Ruby modules are used to download and execute other people's Puppet code, and it can be challenging. Apparently, when Puppet wants to use Ruby, it doesn't use the same Ruby that's on the system, like the server package. The Puppet comes with its own copy of the Ruby executable that's not necessarily the same version that the server has. And so that was a big headache to try to figure out. But the version said, apparently there's 2 versions of Ruby on that server. I'm not an expert in Ruby. Moving along chronologically. Considerations when targeting long-term support releases. I talked about, this is in Vienna, that by waiting to upgrade until a new long-term support release is out, you only get new features every 2 years. And there have been some really cool features that have come out since 1.43 that I personally would like to be able to use. For one thing, for example, in 1.44, check user and template styles were both started being bundled, which means it's a lot easier to enable them. You just have to WF load extension. You no longer need to download them. I believe they both have composer dependencies. Check user uses some JWT library, and template styles uses a CSS sanitizer. So if you didn't have, before they were bundled, you would need to download them and set up their composer dependencies as well. Whereas when they're bundled, the bundled version of MediaWiki/vendor will include those. So that's easy. And the InterWiki extension is now part of MediaWiki Core. There's also, at some point, multi-blocks were introduced. I couldn't find an exact time for when this was because of the progressive rollout that's done for Foundation deployed features, but it's now possible to have multiple blocks against the same person if you really don't like them. Or, more accurately, if you want to indefinitely block them from editing some page or namespace, but also site-wide block them for a week or something. This is more useful for bigger wikis that are public-facing, and you have random people editing. It's not as useful for your internal family search wiki, for example, because I'm assuming all of those editors are people that you've decided should be able to edit, rather than anyone who creates an account. Since 1.45, there's been built-in support for notifications in a much nicer form. You can still use Echo, and that integrates nicely, but if you just have the contents of out-of-the-box MediaWiki, it should be nicer. At a previous non-MediaWiki conference I went to, there was discussion of someone who's developing an environment where they had to get approval for any new external thing they want to add, any new composer package, any new NPM package, presumably any MediaWiki extension. So the fact that this is now always going to be there, even though Echo was nice, it was something you had to download or enable separately. There's also a view content model. For those of us who like writing scripts and gadgets, you can now store things as view on the wiki itself. You no longer need to hack around that with your JavaScript.
That's vanilla MediaWiki.
Yes, this is all vanilla MediaWiki.
Wow.
Vanilla MediaWiki has multi-blocks, has built-in notifications, and has view pages. I'm not sure how useful they are without the gadgets extension, but it does exist as a content model, and you can load it. This is all things that are in vanilla MediaWiki. Another thing in 1.45, you can ask for what content model a page has. This was 1.45. I did it first in minimal example that I mentioned earlier. This was my demonstration of a parser function, is fetching the content model of another page. The interface for minimal example looks slightly different, but that's now part of MediaWiki core, and I guess I'll need to update our training code, because why implement a feature that already exists? And finally, a feature that I believe is currently being rolled out on the Foundation wikis, but someone from the Foundation can probably correct me, is watchlist labels. You can explain why correction? Or,
I saw watchlist labels on Test Wikipedia.
yes, so they are live on Test Wikipedia and presumably being rolled out to the non-test Wikipedias. You can now label why is something on your watch list. Oh, this is because it's a target of a long-term abuser, or this is because I want to remember to update it next week. You can now annotate your watch list with labels. But just as there are some good things that come with every new version, there are also some challenges. I talked about, if you're on 1.43 and you're not using anything that is marked as deprecated, and anything that's marked as internal, and anything that's marked as unstable, how many changes do you have to adapt for when you're updating to the next version of MediaWiki? So if you're updating to 1.44, there were breaking changes to 4 interfaces that you're allowed that are stable to implement. 1 to an extendable class, there was a method removed, 2 class constants removed that were previously completely stable, and 1 class that was renamed without an alias. It's not too bad. If we jump to 1.45, there were a whole bunch of methods removed that had been stable on 1.43. Not deprecated, they were totally fine to use. And 1.46 isn't out yet, but as of, I think, a week ago, there were a whole bunch more removals around hooks and class constants, which means if you wanted to update your extension from 1.43 to the current version of master as it is now, here is the list of breaking changes you might need to account for. And we're still only halfway through the 1.46 development cycle, maybe a bit more, and there's still all of the 4.7 development cycle. So there is a benefit to staying on long-term support releases. You don't have to update your code as much. But when you do update your code, in newer versions of PHP, it will now be easier. In Vienna, I talked about the then new deprecated attribute in PHP 8.4 and how it can be used to emit deprecation warnings for functions and methods and class constants. Functions and methods, you could always use the WF deprecated function to just say, hey, we're deprecated, but there was no equivalent functionality for class constants. Now PHP has it built in. But I said that, oh, you can't use it for everything. For example, flagged revs has a global constant with a typo in the name, never balked. So they define never blocked as well, but you couldn't detect that as a site operator. You couldn't say, oh, this is deprecated, I should use the other one. And after spending way too long figuring out how to implement this, in PHP 8.5, you can now add attributes to compile time constants. Compile time meaning it's declared with const name equals value rather than define. If you don't want to require 8.5, you can, of course, use eval. So this code will define apcond fr never balked to the same value on both 8.4 and 8.5, but on 8.5 it will also be marked as deprecated. And if you try and use that constant, it will trigger a deprecation warning, and you'll be told, hey, use never blocked instead. I'm assuming the foundation isn't going to add eval into flagged revs for this tiny usage, but I've been thinking about adding a tiny composer library that will just abstract that away and let you just define either a non-deprecated constant if you're on 8.4 or a deprecated one if you're on 8.5. But yeah, this is something that got me very involved in how PHP is built and written. I have a post about it on my blog at Scherzer.dev, and you can read all about this required changes to the grammar of the language and to the opcodes, and it was an experience. I now have a much better understanding of how PHP actually works. But yeah, this is what drove me to get that experience and to start working on it, was that you couldn't in the past deprecate global constants, and now you can. I've started working on being able to deprecate class aliases properly with deprecation notices. That's in progress. No promises it'll be there in 8.6. We'll see. Last but not least, follow-ups from Sandusky. I talked about handling database updates. We had a client that had been updating from 1.31 to 1.43. We've since then needed to upgrade an even older database. So show of hands, who's dealt with a 1.27 MediaWiki database? OK, 1.23, 1.19, 1.15. 1.11. I assume it was every 4 is a long term. So anything older than?
No, it started on 1.18 or 1.19.
OK, anyone done a wiki older than 1.10? Well, Wikitech had to upgrade a database from MediaWiki 1.9 to 1.43. And I say we had to upgrade it. We actually had to upgrade it twice. Not just because we messed up. Or not because we messed up. I've said not because we messed up, but rather MediaWiki no longer supports updating from an arbitrary version of the past. You can now only upgrade from the last 2 long-term support releases. So first we upgraded to 1.35, and from there we upgraded to 1.43. And those updates, after some manual database fixes, worked, but the database state wasn't exactly what MediaWiki was expecting. So Lad's group wrote this tool for the foundation wikis, the set of tools, DB Analyzor tools. And one of the tools there is to check for schema drifts. It will say, hey, here's the current describe table or show create table in MySQL, and here is the abstract schema that MediaWiki wants. What's the difference? Somehow, some of our tables were missing the auto increment on their primary IDs. This is one of the things that blocked the upgrade script from working. There was no auto increment on the revision ID when we tried upgrading. And so when it was trying to insert some new revision, it failed. Apparently, in 1.9, you didn't actually need it to be marked as auto increment. MediaWiki would identify what revision ID to use and insert that for you. Now you do. So Ledge Group was gracious enough to accept a couple of pull requests that we sent to expand the checks that that tool would do and to make it easier to run on third-party wikis. I'm going to guess that we were the first to request to try and using this on third-party wikis because we actually found what I think is a mistake in MediaWiki's 1.43 schema. The abstract version of the schema marked a property or a field as nullable or not nullable that was different from the actual SQL. And somehow this was never caught. Wikitech filed a report, and this has since been fixed and backported. But yeah, so it's a great tool. It also does not, one of the things it doesn't check, however, is if your auto increment ID, when it gets marked as auto increment, is valid. We were somehow missing, I think, 15 rows in the in some content table where there was just no text for IDs 1,000 through 1,015 or something. So that was the manual database editing of, I don't know what happened to this. Let's just put in some text that says, you know, Daniel was here, so that the upgrade would work. So yes, separate from all the considerations I talked about in handling database updates from 1.31 and older, where you have to work around, you know, the actor migration, the potential for lost data there. You should also be mindful of the fact that the schema you're upgrading from might not match what was expected, and so your upgrades might not work as expected. And so in addition to always make a backup before you run any changes, something you might want to check for when you're done is what does the schema drifts tool say is different between what we have and what is expected. And for those of us who are not running the latest version of the schema from the master branch of MediaWiki, one of the changes that we sent that Lads Group accepted was you can now specify here is where on Garrett, however it's pronounced. Here is the path to the abstract schema we want to compare with. So you can give it, here's the 1.43 schema, check against that. Or the 1.44 schema, and check against that. Thank you. Questions about any of the talks I followed up about, or hallway track discussions?
Okay.
I had one question about the wiki extensions. You said it wouldn't work with Composer installed extensions. What if you use with source, which I always do when so it always checks out from Git?
So my understanding of the Composer installer is that the version itself is still managed. The version of your extension is going to be managed by Composer in your composer.json and composer.lock. And if you were to just upgrade the Git clone by itself, you would be messing with Composer's understanding of what is currently installed and checked out. It might work. Having looked more at how Composer works recently, I'm optimistic, but I don't think we've tested that. It's now public though, so if you want to test it and file a bug report saying, oh no, it doesn't work, or file a note saying, hey, update your README and now it does work, that'd be great. The wiki extensions here is a link to the GitHub repo.
That's a good point about the lock file. The other question I had was, I saw it points to new revisions, but do you have tags? Can you say, oh, a new tag has appeared if you only want to go with tags?
I do not believe so. It tries to essentially just git pull. We'll git fetch first and see what's available, and it'll just upgrade whatever branch you currently have checked out. You know, the way I have minimal example, say there's new updates, is I just reset the previous commit and then discarded the changes. It's not advanced enough to say, okay, here's the specific version I want to check out. It's more of a upgrade to the latest version the same way you would with the MediaWiki installer or the MediaWiki updater.
One more question, does the web user have to be able to write the disk for this?
Yes, presumably, yes. When we adapted, so this extension was originally tested on 1.35. One of the things when I was updating it to 1.43 is working around Git permissions in dubious ownership, and it complaining that it wasn't the right owner. But whatever user is executing the script whatever system Linux user, not MediaWiki user account, whatever user is executing this will need to be able to run git checkout and the other commands that do modify files. I don't know if being able to run git commands is enough, or you also need to be able to write to the disk files manually. I don't know enough about Git internals.
You would.
Okay. Other questions? How am I doing on time?
It's fine. Yeah. About 5 minutes over time. But, question? Okay. By the way,
unimportant questions?
unimportant questions, yeah. By the way, I looked up R10K and it stands for Robot 10,000.
Okay, so R10K in this slide, it's not similar to the I18N and A11Y and
Nope.
is it observability, is it O10Y? All of those shortcuts, this isn't one of them. It just looks like it to confuse us because why else would you name something like that?
All right, well, that was a lot there. So thank you very much, Daniel, for the talk.
Megan,
Yeah.
are you sure you don't want your unimportant question?
Oh, the R10K. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Sorry.
I'll ask one.
Never mind.
We'll check after. Thank you, Daniel. Can you describe in your ideas the difference between automation and orchestration?
I would interpret orchestration as what a conductor does. He says, hey, do this, play these notes, or make the system infrastructure look like this. Have your Nginx configuration with these files and have these system users. Automation would be the process of applying changes or applying some process. So you could have your Puppet repo saying, here's the configuration we want, and instead of running Puppet, you would just do that by hand. You could just, Vim, Ed, Emacs, whatever your editor of choice. I'm not trying to get into a fight. I use Nano. You could just nano the file and say, okay, here's the content I want. And you would still then be following some kind of orchestration where you have a single source of truth for here is how the server should look, and it's just being applied manually. Or you can automate the application as well by using Puppet or Ansible to make those changes.
So you're saying you're using Puppet to do orchestration and automation?
Yes.
Okay.
We are using the Puppet agent to apply the changes as well. But if we disabled Puppet on the server because we don't want to leak a secret, we could then enforce that state manually, in theory. Anyone else? Questions, concerns, constructive criticism, non-constructive criticism? Okay.
Well, cool. Yeah, it's a users and developers conference, and this one was heavy on the developer, so it's nice to have that. Yeah, great. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.